Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Palmer McIntyre with the Great Trail State Coalition and want to welcome you to our cities, towns, and counties for Trails Working Group webinar. Today, we're featuring trails of all types, and we've got Will Washam and Jeromy Wegrzyn from McAdams. And this is a presentation from the Great Trail State Conference that was in September 2024. And we're recording it here today, so it'll be part of our permanent digital library of resources. And they'll be talking about all the different types of trails, the full spectrum from urban greenways to single track, and what makes them all unique and what ties them all together into a network of trails that makes North Carolina the Great Trail State. So I'll turn it over to Will and Jeromy.
Thank you, Palmer. Hey, everyone. Will Washam here. Really excited to be on the call to talk trails with you all today. Jeromy and myself are based out of the Charlotte office of McAdams. I'm a senior planner for active transportation, greenways, and trails, and Jeromy is a designer for active transportation, greenways, and trails projects and a registered landscape architect. We're both out of the Charlotte office, but we're part of a greater 14-person team dedicated to active transportation, greenways, and trails in McAdams. And our colleagues in our active transportation team span our Raleigh, Durham, Charlotte, and our brand new Asheville office. So for this presentation, we're going to walk you guys through 7 different trail types. And we're also going to feature 5 case studies around the state of North Carolina, some projects that Jeromy and I have worked on, and some trails that we just think are really great best practice examples. We hope you all learn a few things, but more importantly, are inspired to dream big on the next trail project in your community. Jeromy and I, of course, are big-time trail users as well as trail planning and design professionals. I had to get a little photo of my 2-year-old here in the presentation. We both live in Mooresville, North Carolina, and I myself have a lot of North Carolina ties. Actually, my mom's family's from Johnston County, so great to see you, Austin, and hear of all the great things continuing to go on in Johnston County. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeromy to start us out with the 7 trail types.
Great. Thank you, Will. So I'll just quickly recap or introduce the 7 trail types here. We've got things like primitive single track, contouring single track, wide natural surface trails, wide gravel surface, trails that fall within kind of our natural surface or gravel surface trail typologies, trail types. Then on the right-hand side of the screen, we start to see some of the more permanent trail types in terms of permanent paved trail types, such as side paths, paved greenways, separated bikeways, and sidewalks. But these are, like Will mentioned, these are all the trails that'll help contribute to a bicycle, pedestrian, sometimes, and/or trail network to some degree. So next slide. So the first 4, I'll go over some of those natural surface or gravel trail types. It really kind of falls into 2 categories here, this being the first. Next slide. Some of our primitive single track trails, they're typically seen with a maximum 24 inches wide. They're seen more in kind of our rugged terrain areas or locations. They'll incorporate natural obstacles and features such as boulders, rocks, and logs. They're steep, as steep as necessary and not ADA compliant, but they do make great trails, trail typology for remote areas receiving little to no maintenance. I think some of the benefits of this trail type is that they can be easily hand built. You could get a group of people mobilized with some hand tools deep in a remote area to build some of these trail types that, and provide access to some of these remote locations, which wouldn't necessarily be the case if implementing a different trail type. So they can also utilize natural stone or other drainage features as well. So next slide. Contouring single track is our next trail type. These are a little bit wider than some of our primitive single track or primitive trails. They'll be about 2 to 3 feet wide and clear of most of our major natural features and obstacles on the shoulders. You can think of this trail type as providing, or catering more towards a wider range of users, including hikers, joggers. You can see mountain bikers or sometimes equestrian uses on these trail types, but they're can be still relatively steep. You can have grades of up to 12% or so for some short stretches. But again, these will fall into having received kind of infrequent maintenance from groups. And if they are maintained, a lot of times, at least here locally, smaller advocacy groups are mobilized in order to take on the responsibility for that maintenance, or in large part can be a volunteer organization as well. These will have light construction and permitting impacts. You typically see small scale grading equipment, creating these trails and or maintaining them. But the advantage of them is that they're still able to be implemented in more of the remote areas. So next slide. This is kind of a shameless plug for one of the cross sections that we had done here on a construction project, but it's a typical section for a natural surface trail, showing things like, the trail width, the center line of the trail, some of the additional information that goes into that, such as like back sloping, the proposed grade to tie into the existing grade, and then just some additional notes, including limits of vegetation clearing, right? We like to make sure that our vegetation is cleared along the shoulders as well as up into the tree canopy as well. So next slide. So next we'll talk about wide natural surface trails. These are typically machine graded and compacted using larger equipment. Still, they're not going to meet ADA, but they'll have typically be less severe grade slope wise than some of your more narrower contouring signal track. You use machines to clear and compact these. The side slopes oftentimes dictate your grading limits for some of these things, and construction in remote areas is possible to some degree. So, yep, next slide. Then we'll move into our wide gravel surface trails. These trails are typically 4 to 8 feet wide, with a shoulder and minimal trail obstacles. They can meet ADA, and many serve as a good alternative to paved greenway trails. But note that they do still require suitable compaction. Materials on these trails will have and require additional maintenance or more maintenance associated with them in comparison to permanent pavement trails. And it is, in comparison to the wide natural surface trails, they are limited to less remote areas. These are a good alternative for maybe a suburb or an exurb housing development that wants to provide some sort of amenity that may have to meet ADA requirements, but they're interested in or concerned about permanent pavement impacts or cost. So next slide. This is what a typical section may look like for one of those wide gravel surface trails. You'll typically have a layer of crushed fines and overlaid with a stone course, such as a 57 wash stone. And in this example, we have that whole kind of like wrapped in a geotextile fabric. This is a good design, we think, for an area that receives a lot of inundation, or is frequent inundation, water inundation. The stone underneath the trail type helps the water kind of drain away from the fresh fine surface trail. Next slide. Or it could look something like this, where, for instance, we have a crown slope where water is draining away on either side of the trail, where you have that 57 stone sunk underneath that crushed fine section, still wrapped in a geotextile fabric. But really, this section and trail type would be something that you'd see in an area that's a little less prone to stormwater inundation. So, all right, next slide. So that was the first four kind of natural surface, wide gravel surface trails. I'd like to move into some of the next four that are commonly seen within our developed urbanized areas. But as Will mention, that's not entirely the case. And that's one of the points we'll be making later in this presentation. But the next couple we'll go over the side paths. So these have significant planning, permitting, and stormwater construction impacts. As anyone who's implemented retrofitting a sidewalk will tell you, they're typically 8 to 12 feet wide. They can be, have a buffer. They typically follow an existing roadway or proposed roadway. It can be made out of materials such as asphalt or concrete. It follows pro-ag and typical grades seen that are ADA compliant. So these may necessitate design consultant for design and permitting. We'll note that the mobilization is limited due to the materials that you're using. So, it's harder to get concrete or asphalt, further away from construction access point. So that in that instance, these trails are limited in that factor. And things like large scale drainage, system modifications, urban stormwater evaluations need to be done. Right-of-way acquisition may need to be looked at. Things like utility relocates, driveway replacements are common with these types of facilities. So, next slide. Our greenway trails. Since they don't typically follow roadways, they can be a little bit wider. And oftentimes they're less constrained when it comes to things like I just mentioned, the utility relocates and driveway replacements, that type of thing. Grading them can still be difficult, but they're also a little bit more forgiving typically than wedging a side path along an existing roadway. Typically these will be designed with outdoor accessibility standards in mind in terms of grades. So if you've master planned these and they're located along an urbanized stream corridor, it may be beneficial to pair these with a stream restoration project to combine permit any floodway mapping revisions. But things like certain features will be included in these trail types, like asphalt, concrete, boardwalk or bridges. In this instance, we have a picture of a bridge and a little butterfly seat. So we have, opportunities for placemaking elements and art are often seen in these. This is kind of like your workhorse of typically the trails that most municipalities like to install as greenways. So next slide. As far as the section goes, we typically have a flexible pavement surface as asphalt or maybe even a concrete on top of an aggregate base course and compacted subgrade. So this example shows a gravel shoulder, which might actually be beneficial for runners or gravel bikers. But the intent is to also provide some level of separation between the pavement edge and kind of where that proposed grade is tying back down into existing grade. So, all right, next slide. So last one I'd like to cover in terms of pavement, separated bikeways and sidewalks. These can be 16 to 26 feet wide. This particular photo is taken in Charlotte. These are asphalt, concrete. They separate our modes of travel, right? So you see your bikes operating side by side, and then pedestrians either grade separated or horizontally separated. But these typically follow streets and are subject to pro-ag and take years and years of planning and design and those types of considerations to fully implement. But with that, I'd like to turn it back over to I guess there's a couple more slides here. So so as we've kind of noted earlier, I would kind of then separate these into two different categories. So you have your single track gravel surface trails, kind of on the lower end of the spectrum, lower cost, lower volume of users groups, lower construction intensity, that type of thing. Whereas your side paths, greenways, and bikeways and sidewalks will typically have a higher cost, but in turn accommodate more diverse user group and will meet ADA requirements. They can also have their own set of issues when it comes to construction complexity. So next slide. Yeah, again, our single track and wide gravel surface trails have minimal planning and design complexities. They can be, like I mentioned, community-based maintenance potential, like those advocacy groups can maintain these. It does, although they do pose a barrier to accessibility, and are most often associated with recreation. As opposed to some of our side paths, greenways, and bikeways are, recreation and also transportation. All right, next slide. Yep, so single tracks are more use specific, fall within that lower range of less diverse user groups. Bikeways, separated sidewalks are on the upper end, with some of our contouring, single track, gravel, surface trails, and greenways falling somewhere in the middle. And then in terms of how these can provide complementary experiences, paved greenways can be lumped together with wide natural surface, contouring single track, perhaps maybe in a park setting or something like that, where you're trying to provide a diverse range of experiences within a smaller space. Separated bikeways and sidewalks will often be seen in your urban areas, lumped together, and then your paved greenways, primitive single track, wide natural surface, and side paths can fall within that range, somewhere between. So, all right, and with that, I'd like to turn it over back to Will to go over some case studies.
Great, thanks, Jeromy. Yeah, it was really fun to put together that summary when Jeromy and I developed this presentation for the conference last year. This is not an authoritative or comprehensive guide on every standard associated with those trail types, but we wanted to provide you an overview of what makes those unique and how you might use them. And then these case studies are going to show how they can work together in the field and maybe some applications for these trail types that you hadn't seen before and that could inspire your next trail project. So a perfect segue from being at that upper end of the trail spectrum, the separated bikeways and sidewalks. This is the 6th Street cycle track in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was fortunate enough to work on this project when I was the bicycle program coordinator for the Charlotte Department of Transportation. And the 6th Street cycle track was kind of born out of the necessity to connect the Cross Charlotte Trail into and through Uptown Charlotte. If you haven't heard of the Cross Charlotte Trail, it's a 30-mile greenway trail that you see here on the screen that spans Mecklenburg County in its entirety. It connects 140,000 residents and 130,000 jobs that are within a half mile of this trail. It is mostly complete right now. There's a couple gaps here in the northern section near UNC Charlotte's campus. And of course, right there in the middle of the screen is Uptown Charlotte. So to make this connection, you'll see the Cross Charlotte Trail on the eastern side of the screen, and then on the west side of Uptown, you'll see the Irwin Stewart Creek Greenways. In between is Uptown, which is the largest urbanized area in the state of North Carolina. There's 33 million square feet of office, 18 million visitors a year come to Uptown, and there's 35,000 people that live within the I-277 ring in Uptown Charlotte. So the purpose of the 6th Street cycle track was to be this trail connector between the two greenways. Photo on the left, this is the Little Sugar Creek Greenway, part of the Cross Charlotte Trail on the east side of Uptown Charlotte as it approaches the 7th Street Bridge, which is the conduit into Uptown. And the photo on the right is the 7th Street Bridge before this project was implemented. And you can just see from the photo on the right all of the various challenges that you start to uncover in the urban context. You're sharing these spaces with a lot of vehicles. You've got big pieces of infrastructure like existing bridges you need to retrofit. And then, of course, I just like this photo because you see the urban jungle in the background that this project has to navigate. Once you get into Uptown, there's a lot of competing needs. There's high pedestrian volumes. There's retail front doors. You got folks coming in and out of offices, shops. So how do greenway users fit in to all these competing needs within the streetscape of Uptown Charlotte? Definitely took some planning to figure out how we're going to get greenway users into that fabric. As I mentioned, I was with CDOT from 2018 to 2022, which was really the meat of design and construction for this project. But the planning was really done in 2016 and 2017 through the Uptown Connect study. And if you're interested in urban planning, transportation, traffic planning, this was a very comprehensive study, really a groundbreaking study, I think, for North Carolina, where it evaluated all of the 35 corridors east-west across uptown Charlotte to figure out where we can add this greenway connector, because we'd have to take something away. We're not taking the sidewalks away because there's way too many pedestrians in uptown. It's a pedestrian-oriented development pattern. So we need to figure out where we can take some space from cars and give it to bikes to get that full trail user experience. And so out of that study and out of all that traffic evaluation, there were 4 corridors recommended to be a network to provide greenway users connections into and through uptown, with 6th Street being the first corridor for implementation. So when we were thinking about the design considerations for this project, we wanted to match the greenway comfort. This needed to be a fully separated facility, and we needed to have space for the high volumes of bicyclists and pedestrians. We really had to take into account traffic signal phasing. We were going to have riders going counterflow along 6th Street. It's a one-way street, so we had to look at the traffic signal phasing, and we also had to look at the turning movements. We had high volumes of cars, especially during the AM and PM peaks, turning across what would be this future cycle track. We also had to look at our driveway crossing design. We crossed the driveways for some huge parking decks with thousands of spaces, folks coming in and out of uptown each day to their offices. And then, of course, we wanted to look at branding and wayfinding. This is a portion of the Carolina Thread Trail in Mecklenburg County. And what you see, the photo on the left, this was actually our pilot project. So this was early implementation. So this is not the final configuration, but this was a really important step for us to bring city leaders along as this project came to life. So this is what the final product looks like. You'll notice a couple differences. There's full concrete barriers. We added some placemaking and art on those barriers as well. This was actually from the ribbon cutting day, so we had it spruced up and looking really nice. It was over a $7 million project and a 2.5-mile separated bikeway that looks just like this. We also reconfigured every ADA curb ramp along this corridor, which added a good bit of cost to the project. And it was really a learning experience. We didn't realize we were going to trip all the ProWag regulations to retrofit all those curb ramps. So it was an ADA project as much as it was a trail and bikeway project. For all that, we got one amazing connection that was 7 years in the making. Did it have to take that long? Well, no, it really didn't. Now, it was a big challenge because it was the first major separated bikeway project in Charlotte, really one of the first in North Carolina. So there were a lot of firsts, a lot of lessons learned, a lot of bringing business leaders, city leaders, citizens along for the ride. But you can absolutely implement cycle tracks as a part of your trail project much quicker. You see some photos here from our ribbon cutting of our pilot project on the left. And then this is a photo of that pilot project on the 7th Street Bridge, which when we kind of put our noses to the grindstone and had the leadership support, we implemented this pilot project from design to implementation in just 8 weeks and for less than $250,000. And the pilot project was 0.8 of a mile long. And did it have to cost that much? Well, no, it didn't. So you heard me just mention the cost of the pilot project, but you can definitely implement these with a lighter touch. This photo on the right is from a resurfacing project in Uptown that was along that recommended separated bikeway network. This street was up for resurfacing, and so at that point in time, we just went ahead and implemented the cycle track and maybe retrofitted in the future, but we were able to absorb some of that cost into the resurfacing to make it much more affordable. These aren't just for the big city. Implementing cycle tracks as a part of your trail project can be something that you want to look into in your community, especially as we have so many trails getting closer and closer to our North Carolina Main Street towns. Cycle tracks are a great way to get folks that are biking on your greenway into your downtown without clogging up the sidewalks. And so quickly wanted to touch on the Acosta Trail in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Annotated here on this map, the Acosta Trail as it comes into downtown Hendersonville. Hendersonville is in the middle of your screen, and you can see that traditional urban block style as you get into downtown. So the Acosta Trail, it's so close yet so far. As it currently sat before this South Main Street cycle track project for trail users to get into downtown, experience the restaurants, the shops, the activities. There was sidewalk connectivity, but there really wasn't a great intuitive way for bicyclists to get from the trail into downtown. There was the subject section of the South Main Street Cycle Track project, and then of course you can see the urban core of Hendersonville. So here's a photo on the left of construction of the project on that South Main Street corridor, and this was actually designed by our McAdams colleagues in our Asheville office. They were part of TPD, Traffic Planning and Design, when they did this project, but they've since come into our team. We're so happy to have them. If anybody's been to Hendersonville and seen this in the last couple of years, drop us a note in the chat. And then, it's safe to say we'll continue to see cycle tracks popping up across the state in the coming years that are part of Greenway Trail projects. McAdams was working with the city of Greensboro on the East Greensboro Greenway feasibility study. If you look at the map in the top right, you can see that this Greenway on its western terminus does come into downtown Greensboro, and we start to get these urban street conditions where you've got land uses fronting the sidewalk, and you've got to decide, are we going to widen that sidewalk for a shared use path, or can we retrofit the street and add a cycle track to support the bicyclist users for the Greenway Trail? And so for this study, we did recommend a cycle track section as it went into downtown, and here's a cross section from that project. All right, moving on down the spectrum, we're going to talk about Rocky Branch Park. I said we had a Gaston County case study, and Rocky Branch Park is just west of the Catawba River. You see the Catawba River there on the screen. US 74 and 85, the major bridge connections into Gaston County from Mecklenburg. And Rocky Branch Park's uniquely situated between Belmont and Cramerton. There was a legacy volunteer-built trail network that supported mountain biking and some hiking that existed on this property, but it became the focus for some more investment and community-led improvements. This park is also right along the Carolina Thread Trail, and those are the orange lines that you see here on the map. And you'll notice that the Carolina Thread Trail alignment was not going through Rocky Branch Park, but with this project, we were able to develop an alignment that better utilized this park as a part of the Carolina Thread Trail. So a couple of the goals from the community for this project were to reduce the barrier of entry for users to get into the park. The legacy trails were pretty steep. They're a little confusing to navigate. And they wanted to increase community connectivity with the park being situated right on the town limits between Cramerton and Belmont, and also increase the variety of trail types to accommodate more users. And here's that connectivity being brought in with downtown Belmont being there on the right-hand side of your screen. And so the solid red line, this is sidewalks and very low volume neighborhood streets that take you right from historic Belmont, right from the restaurants and the shops. Actually, we got a great bike shop in downtown, South Main Cycles, directly to the entrance of Rocky Branch Park. And then there's that future connectivity through the park that would become the Carolina Thread Trail. So here's the master plan concept, and I've got to give a shout out to Craig Brixer from Community Trail Design, one of our really talented trail designers and planners in North Carolina. He did this master plan. He actually did the entire park design. I was a part of this project as a community volunteer with the Tar Heel Trailblazers. So the master plan proposed a gravel surface trail to provide the connectivity between the two towns and serve kind of as a pseudo greenway. It integrated really well into the trail network to use that trail type. There was less grading and clearing required, so we were able to maintain more tree canopy and less clearing, and it was much more friendly to the project budget, just giving this specific context for Rocky Branch Park rather than a paved greenway trail. So this directly fits into that gravel surface trail type that Jeromy went over earlier, and this does vary a little bit between 4 and 8 feet wide based on some of the conditions and terrain. As I mentioned, we wanted to minimize clearing, so there's a couple spots where it does neck down to 4 feet, but it gets up to 8 feet wide in many spots. It is capped with a crushed concrete for all weather use. It is not ADA compliant because of the terrain variations, but we were able to achieve our goal of limiting construction impacts. What's unique about this trail type and why it fits in really well to Rocky Branch Park is, this crushed aggregate trail was constructed with the same kind of machines that were used to build the mountain bike single track. I failed to mention when I was on the previous slide showing the master plan that, in addition to providing this connectivity, the Rocky Branch Park project also redesigned all of the mountain bike trails in the park. There are now 3 progressive loops for beginners, intermediates, and advanced riders. And the construction contractor was Nature Trails, a North Carolina-based company, and they were able to use similar equipment to what they were using for the mountain bike trails. So it makes it really affordable and kind of opens up a whole new range of contractors to implement these kind of trails from, I guess, aside from your traditional, more heavy contractors that build greenways with paved surface. This is really 2 towns, 1 park now with the implementation of this gravel trail. So here's the monument on the town limits between Cramerton and Belmont. And the towns actually added this into the project. This wasn't part of the original construction project, but they thought it was just so cool that this monument went up. And as you're entering Belmont, you see the Belmont logo, and as you're entering Cramerton, same thing. And a couple things you'll note on this photo, that's the crushed concrete surface. And then, some of those extra shy distance, small clearing on either side of this trail to increase that effective width. The trail might only be 6 to 8 feet wide, but there's just a little extra clearing to give users breathing room. It does get pretty busy here on a nice afternoon. And this trail type and the whole project really opened up the park to an entire new range of users. On the left, mountain biker from the grand opening of the advanced riding area, which was 2 years ago. We've got folks that are hiking and using this park that never even knew it existed, that had lived in Belmont their entire lives. And then, of course, more accessibility for families. And this gravel trail type, I think accessibility is really key. And if you're looking to add more accessible recreation options to a project that has soft surface trails, a gravel or a crushed concrete trail surface really opens up these trails to more users. And that is my daughter making another cameo with my wife at Rocky Branch Park. All right, and our final case study. We did good on time. That means we're going to have plenty of time for questions. We wanted to share some about the Fonta Flora State Trail. It's one of our favorite trails in North Carolina. One that McAdams has had the opportunity to work on a little bit over the past couple of years. For those that are not familiar, Fonta Flora State Trail was authorized as a state trail in 2015, and it begins in Asheville on the western terminus and goes all the way to Morganton, including a loop around Lake James State Park. So over 100 miles of planned trails here. And the map that you see on the screen shows the completed sections in the solid line, and then the sections that are still in planning stages in the dashed lines. We've got a number of different trail types along the Fonta Flora State Trail. So we're going to cover sections that are paved greenway, that are concrete side path, that are wide natural surface, and contouring single track. For the paved section, we're going to go to Marion and the Joseph McDowell Memorial Greenway. And this is your classic paved greenway trail type. Joseph McDowell Memorial Greenway, it's a few miles outside of Marion. So it's kind of in this sweet spot between an urbanized area and then moving away a little bit more into rural and backcountry settings. This is a great greenway trail, just about 2 miles. Connecting to the Joseph McDowell Memorial Greenway in the future will be the North Main Street side path, connecting that greenway into downtown Marion. This was a project McAdams was able to work on as a feasibility study in 2022. That prior to my time at McAdams, and don't 100% quote me, but I believe this study was funded by the Paved Trails Feasibility Study Program through the state of North Carolina. So I wanted to throw that context out for this group. So with this feasibility study, and this actually goes across the board for feasibility studies, the purpose is to evaluate all alignment options. And that's what you see here on the screen. With a side path, you obviously have side of street decisions to be made. You have crossing decisions to be made. So this allows all those ideas and potential alignments to get out there on the table to come up with the best project possible. We're also going to take a look in feasibility studies with property and infrastructure impacts. These are going to be your some of your biggest cost items and your biggest schedule items as these projects move forward. Property acquisition is really going to impact the schedule of a project, and then impacting infrastructure such as drainage with curb and gutter, ditches, moving of utilities. That's a big cost and a schedule impact as well. So here's some of the final concept plans from that feasibility study. And one of the things that jumps out to me when I look at this project is you saw on the first slide that all sides of the street were evaluated. This crossing location, is located thoughtfully away from these dueling right-hand turns. So there's a lot of different elements that transportation planners look at when deciding alignment options, crossing locations. So that's one of the reasons why feasibility studies are so great to do for your projects, especially when they interact with big infrastructure like state highways. A couple more of the concepts. You'll notice the topography on the south side of the street here. That was one of the big driving factors to have this shared use path aligned on the north side of the street, although there were driveway crossings, so I'm sure that was part of the trade-off decision. You look at the driveway crossings, they're maybe I'd call them mid-volume driveway crossings. They're not extremely high volume. We're not crossing the driveway of a Walmart or a Target. So yes, it's not ideal, but the topography on the south side was really prohibitive for locating a shared use path. And then going further down into getting closer to Marion, more trade-off decisions here. There was topography on the north side, but the trade-off conversations deemed that it was better for the project long-term to incur a little bit more cost, have a retaining wall for this steep topography that you see in red, instead of crossing all these higher volume driveways down here, Westwood Chateau Drive, and then the multitude of driveways here for the car dealership. So ultimately, this was over a 2-mile side path that was studied in feasibility. Part of the feasibility studies are to develop detailed cost estimates, and not always the bearer of good news when we get to the cost part, but it's really important to understand the real world cost implications. So a relatively expensive section because of the topography associated with it here in Marion along 221, as well as the drainage impacts for curb and gutter and ditch sections. Feasibility studies typically recommend phasing. So you'll see there's 3 phases here in the project. Phase 1 was projected to be constructed in FY27, phase 2 in FY30, and phase 3 in FY2035. And when we produce these cost estimates, we do escalate these to the future build year for budgeting purposes. So next we'll look at some wide natural surface trail on the Fonta Flora at Lake James County, or excuse me, Fonta Flora County Park. Such an awesome park. Our friends at Destination by Design designed this project. Got to give them a shout out. And a college roommate of mine, Mike Thomas from Terra Tech Trails, actually constructed the natural surface trails here. So thanks to Mike for some of these photos. You've got access to 18 miles of the Fauna Flora Trail at this park, connectivity to Lake James State Park through natural surface trails. There's parking, restrooms, and you've got access to the lake as well. So this county park features the wide natural surface trail type, and you're going to get a 5 to 6 foot wide trail tread here. I think it's really unique. It's all natural surface. This is a photo from construction from Terra Tech Trails. So this was a mini excavator constructed trail, but he brought in a mini steamroller for compaction. So there's limited obstacles found within the trail and on the shoulder. And it's really accessible for a lot of user groups. I got some more slides on that, but it was just perfect context for this trail type to get a lot of people out to enjoy the trails, but then also reduce the cost. So here's some photos, and I took these last year prior to the conference. This trail is 6 years old, and it's received very minimal maintenance. So it's a testament to how well you can compact natural surface trails. I actually went out for a bike ride to take these photos. And yeah, it's just uncanny at how smooth and enjoyable the trail still is after 6 years. With the county does do some maintenance out here. They're obviously clearing trees, but there's been virtually no maintenance to the trail tread at all. So this trail type, it really covers a lot of the spectrum, and it blurs the lines between a single track experience and a greenway experience. You're able to get folks out here for hikes that can't tackle larger backcountry trails. You're able to get folks out here on their mountain bikes that might not be able to approach traditional steep mountainous terrain because of the smooth surface here, and really everybody in between. We've taken my 2-year-old daughter out here on the shotgun seat. It's actually one of her very first mountain bike trails. This trail type was really flexible. It still had to traverse steep terrain as needed. You can kind of see the grades here in this photo. I thought it illustrated that a good bit, but yeah, this section does have some steep grades, and there's still challenging spots. They had to use some switchbacks up steep pitches. That's the great thing about natural surface trails, is they can be flexible. And there were great soil types here, and that helps lead to minimal maintenance and high tread resiliency. As I mentioned earlier, yeah, it's a 7-year-old tread built by TerraTech Trails out of Linville, North Carolina, and maintained by Burke County. And finally, a section of the Fonta Flora Trail in Old Fort, the Copper Ridge Trail. And this is a true contouring single track trail section. I know a lot of folks on the call know about the Old Fort Trails Plan. Such an awesome project in North Carolina. It's a community-led initiative. They got a large trail accelerator grant from IMBA, the International Mountain Bike Association, to help bring this community's vision to life. They also received $2.5 million in funding from the state of North Carolina to help construct this trail network. Here's the entire trails plan with all that 40 miles of trail on the right-hand side of the screen. And then on the left, we've zoomed into an inset of the Copper Ridge Trail, which is part of the Fonta Flora Trail Network. And you can see that it's right outside of Old Fort. It's got connectivity to the Old Fort picnic area, as well as connectivity to this greater trail network in Old Fort. And it's a perfect setting for a single track natural surface trail. Folks are coming to Old Fort for an adventure experience, and it ties in really well with the existing trails in the National Forest. Again, this is a trail type that's very flexible, so it certainly traverses some steep side slopes. It's 2.6 miles long, and there's 413 feet of elevation gain. So there's some serious terrain here that other trail types would not have been able to traverse. You can see the lowest point is in Mill Creek, 1,600 feet above sea level, and 1,875 feet at the highest elevation point. It provides a great backcountry experience. It really blends into the forest well, as you can see from that photo, but still, it's a really predictable trail tread that's free of obstacles, and that's because it was constructed with mechanized equipment. And that trail tread was able to be heavily excavated down to mineral soil. So that wraps up our presentation, Trails of All Types. We hope you all have enjoyed the journey through the spectrum of trails, and we hope that you got a little inspiration to take back to your next trail projects. With that, we're done and happy to entertain any questions.
Well, thank you, Will and Jeromy. That was fascinating. It's great to hear all the different trail types together, but I've not heard that type of presentation before, and also with those inspiring examples, encouraging us to think outside of the box and way to make connections in different ways. So appreciate that. But yeah, let's have some questions. We can open the floor. You can take yourself off mute and just ask it, or put it in the chat, whichever way you like.
One thing I will say, I know Mitchell reached out, and Mitchell, I did send you a copy of the presentation. So if you don't get that email, I guess let us know. But I'm more than happy to share that with anyone else if they'd like that information as well. So.
Hi, this is John for City Mount Holly. I had a quick question. Wanted to, I guess, kind of get an opinion or your experience with it. In areas that are either, in floodplains or typically prone to flooding, do you see any I guess, advantages and or disadvantages going with a concrete path instead of using asphalt?
Yeah, certainly in areas that are continuously inundated, I think we see less maintenance associated with implementing concrete trail typology, just based on the fact that they're more durable, that they can withstand inundation more frequently than asphalt can. It depends on the specification, but a lot of times we do underneath bridges and in areas that are consistently getting flooded. We'll do what we call a turn down edge on the side of the concrete. It just goes down an additional, 9 to 12 inches or so, and kind of locks that slab in place. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I appreciate it, and thank y'all for the presentation as well.
I have a quick question. So for the natural trail types, what kind of funding do you see cities and towns and like counties using? Because I'm just trying to think through if it was like federal funding, if that would be a lot harder to do that kind of trail type.
That's a great question, McKenna. The tried and true funding source in North Carolina for natural surface trails has been the Recreational Trails Program. That funding source doesn't have a huge allocation each year, which makes it really pair well with natural surface trail projects. The state's able to fund more projects at that lower cost as opposed to paved trail projects. And that funding source, like I mentioned, it's kind of geared towards natural surface, so it's certainly compatible. You're not going to have to comply with other accessible requirements that you might see from other federal funding sources, where natural surface trails might be hard to pair with those. In addition, there are a lot of unique grant programs at the national level for natural surface trails. A lot of these are smaller programs. If natural surface trails have specific user types like a mountain bike use, then you've got bicycle companies, other advocacy groups that provide smaller scale grants. And Palmer, if you want to chime in at all on your experience with funding sources for natural surface trails, absolutely do.
Yeah, definitely RTP is the go-to currently, currently $100,000 cap on that project. There is some legislative efforts at the federal, it is federal money that comes down through DOT, but it's for natural surface trails primarily. There is some effort to increase that funding level. North Carolina gets 1.5 million every year that's dispersed across multiple projects. The Great Trail State Program, which is the Great Trail State Coalition's work here in North Carolina. We did get the 25 million last year. It was one-time funding. It was open to all trail types, so paved and natural surface and paddle and equine, but that was one-time funding. We're hoping to see that fund build up and become a recurring fund like Part F and the Land and Water Fund in North Carolina. Part F, speaking of Part F does allow for some trail funding as part of their scope. So those are the sources that currently are here, but there have been other partners in certain trail projects. Like Will mentioned, sometimes there might be a health foundation or maybe a local corporate partner that's interested in funding in some way. So I think it's sort of assessing what opportunities you have in your particular community for some funding partners in addition to these other sources.
Great. Thank you guys so much. That was great information, and I really appreciate this presentation that you guys gave.
You're very welcome.
I had a question in regards to what was just spoken about with RTP. With it being federal funding, you deal with NEPA and a lot of those costs that come with dealing with environmental, like flood studies and things like that. Would you say RTP is good for a natural surface trail that primarily is in the floodplain when in regards to that with NEPA and SEPA? Because you put in a huge cost to do those studies, and you lose a lot of the benefit, a lot of the benefit that you get.
Yeah, that's a great question, Austin. I haven't administered an RTP project that was primarily in a floodway. Your permitting requirements are going to be greatly reduced with the natural surface trail just based on the amount of disturbance and clearing from an erosion control perspective, a 401, 404 permit. And there's more flexibility when developing those environmental documents, for a natural surface trail. There's not going to be flood rise impacts. Well, I guess it kind of depends on if there's structures, but all that to say is it's typically much less cumbersome to navigate that process with a natural surface trail.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, maybe that's it. Great presentation. Thank you. You're forever memorialized in the Great Trails State Library. So thanks for this information again. And if anyone has any follow-up questions, I'm sure Will and Jeromy will be more than happy to answer those. I can help get those questions to them. And they have their contact information maybe available too. All right, well,
We
thanks,
should have it on this slide. I don't think it is. That's why I switched slides. So feel free to distribute our contact info, Palmer.
We'll add it. Well, thanks, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your week. And again, thank you, Will and Jeromy.
Thank you.
Thank you.